Hi, this is Andy Hoffman, Media Director of Miles Franklin Precious Metals in our 25th year in business. It's midday, Thursday, September 11th, and the title of today's audio blog is All Hell Breaking Loose on the Emerging Market Currency Front. Well, it's September 11th, a particularly difficult day for me, given that I spent nearly 4 years working for Cantor Fitzgerald on the 105th floor of the South Tower. In fact, I was there for the first attack in 1993, and working in Tribeca, just 15 blocks away in 2001, witnessed the death of countless former friends and colleagues from street level. For anyone too young to have experienced World War II, the world as we knew it ended that day, and sadly, the prognosis for the coming decade is equally bleak. For those that died on 9/11, and countless millions of others the world round, care of the handful of sociopaths intent on furthering their interests at the expense of the vast majority, we can only wish that you rest in peace. With those grim memories, it's unnerving to realize that 9/11 was just the first phase of the end of the fiat currency generation, during which an unprecedented fiat currency Ponzi scheme faces its inevitable end game, just as the 600 failed fiat currencies before it. Only this time, it's global, with no fallback currency like the formerly gold-backed Swiss franc, or even the implicitly gold-backed dollar or euro, as not only has 4 decades of money printing swamped the value of minuscule Western gold reserves, but in all likelihood, most of those reserves are long gone, care of surreptitious lending, swapping, and lease agreements that the inexplicably IMF allows central banks to consider off balance sheet. In many cases, we suspect said reserves were outright sold by the London-New York axis of financial evil in their criminal game of suppressing gold to maintain the reserve status of Western fiat currencies, including even the gold of staunch allies like Germany. As this hideous game unravels in the coming years, no doubt the chickens will come home to roost. And for those unfortunates that do not own physical gold and silver when the Ponzi scheme comes crashing down, most ignominiously, those that thought they owned it but in actuality held nothing but empty paper claims, it will already be too late to protect oneself. Today is my 51st audio blog, so next week will mark the 1 year anniversary of this unique free product. Actually, next month will mark my 3rd year working at Miles Franklin. In hindsight, the best career decision I've made. Coincidentally, my hiring occurred just 1 month after gold prices peaked, care of the September 2011 Operation PM Annihilation raids on Labor Day Eve that marked the commencement of the final phase of cartel desperation, which has since increased dramatically. Given what I have dealt with as a precious metal and mining share owner, although my last mining share was sold more than 3 years ago, as well as a mining industry investor relations officer, bullion dealer representative, and broad contrarian, it truly feels like I have been subjected to the trials of Job. However, like Job, my faith in economic Mother Nature has only been strengthened by the miseries cast upon me by the gold cartel. Consequently, and particularly at history's lowest ever inflation-adjusted prices, not to mention well below the cost of production, I have never been more bullish on gold and silver, and the Miles Franklin blog never more comfortable in its role of economic education. Hopefully, you will be one of the new 1% that realizes an unparalleled era of financial history is upon us, and thus prospers by holding the one asset class guaranteed to survive the coming waves of inflation. Or at least, the 1% with the best shot to survive through what will be an exceptionally turbulent time in human history. Per today's title, it appears the next phase of the fiat currency endgame has commenced. With the onset of last week's surprise ECB QE and extended NERP announcements, as well as the rapidly growing consensus that Abenomics will be doubled up when it expires in April, the global fiat regime's Achilles heel is making its presence known in spades, which is the dramatic currency devaluations that occur during times of crisis, as capital flees, quote, lesser currencies for the perceived safety of the reserve currency, no matter how flawed or decayed it has become. I have long documented the so-called emerging market currency crisis that commenced in 2010, from which the average currency, emerging market or otherwise, has since lost nearly 20% and nearly 40% in the fragile five nations of Brazil, Indonesia, India, Turkey, and South Africa, where cumulatively more than a quarter of the world's population resides. As I wrote earlier this week, the single most bullish precious metal factor imaginable is the volatility inherent in fiat currency regimes. As reserve currency, issuers like the Fed, ECB, and BOJ export inflation to the rest of the world, most extremely during times of financial crisis. This is all part and parcel of the final currency war I wrote of nearly 2 years ago, i.e., how central banks compete to devalue their currencies in a bid to make their labor and export markets more competitive. Of course, said gains are only nominal in value, and ultimately invite increasingly draconian retaliation that only serve to accelerate the endgame of mutually assured currency collapse. Amidst such financial torture, people forced to spend the highest proportion of their incomes on life's necessities are impacted the hardest. Hence, the Arab Spring movement of 2010 to 11, which, by the way, is ongoing as we speak. However, ultimately, all people are negatively impacted as the financial cancer works its way from extremities like the Arab nations to the head, that is the United States. And thus, don't for a second forget that it's not against each other that currency devaluation should truly be measured, but items of real value like food, energy, insurance, and oh yeah, physical gold and silver. This is what I wrote of in today's must-read article titled The Lowest Inflation in 5 Years, in which I not only debunk the deflation fallacies generated by central bank propaganda, but demonstrate how even government-published data indicates dramatic price inflation over the last 15 years, let alone the actual, significantly greater cost of living increases we've endured in the real world. As noted in last week's West to East global economic collapse and yesterday's commodity crash, everything from employment to real wages to industrial commodities on a worldwide basis is falling precipitously. Last month, the world's largest heavy equipment company, Caterpillar, announced its 19th straight quarter of declining year-over-year revenues, whilst Walmart's longtime CEO was mysteriously fired right after claiming, quote, lower and middle income customers appear to have made a number of changes to shopping habits that were not the best thing in the world for a retailer, as they adapt to what has been a difficult macroeconomic situation. And for the coup de grace, global retail bellwether McDonald's this week announced an astounding 15% plunge in August same-store sales, making it one of the worst months in its 74-year history. Moreover, what Walmart and McDonald's are to need merchandise, Amazon.com is indisputably to discretionary want items. In need versus want, demand is dying, I highlighted Amazon's catastrophic second quarter results, and even worse third quarter outlook. Essentially, Amazon has never been profitable on a net basis, but now that demand has weakened so significantly, it isn't even profitable on an operating basis, which is probably why the historically weak holiday retail season was no fluke, and certainly not to the weather, but instead the expanding aftermath of the unrelenting Great Recession. Given this horrific global economic backdrop and unprecedented global debt levels, care of 6 years of monstrous economy-killing money printing, the powers that be have no choice but to pump up the printing presses further. This necessity of exponential expansion defines Ponzi schemes, and never in history has a Ponzi scheme been so large, all-encompassing, and dangerous. As for the week's economic data, I could take several pages to describe such misery, but since I have a limited amount of airtime, I'll just go over the highlights. Last week's NFP job catastrophe, just one day after the ECB's historic QE announcement, was one of the worst misses in U.S. history. Just 142,000, quote, jobs were produced, barely half the 230,000 estimated. And as discussed in last month's Island of Lies, such anemic growth clearly didn't jibe with fraudulent economic data such as weekly jobless claims and various arbitrary diffusion indices. Of the 142,000 supposed jobs, 102,000 were phantom birth-death model jobs, which is quite the accomplishment given that U.S. small business ownership has plunged to an all-time low. Meanwhile, a whopping 0 manufacturing jobs were created, and with the labor participation rate falling to a new 35-year low, a full third of the population are now considered temporary workers, led by the over 55 age category, which are aggressively taking minimum wage jobs from youths because they can't afford retirement. In Europe, we saw historic plunges in the Sentex Continental Sentiment Index and the benchmark German ZEW index. In China, we learned that nearly all cities are experiencing material real estate declines, as history's largest property bubble implodes, and last but not least, the land of the setting sun saw its 2Q GDP, consumer spending, and business investment data revised significantly lower, making the odds of Abenomics 2 that much stronger, as well as stoking fears of the potential economic cataclysm that next year's second stage sales tax hike might cause. Heck, the Bank of Japan apparently monetized short-term JGBs this week with negative yields, showing just how psychotic their devotion to hyperinflation has become. Throw in this week's suicidal European sanctions of Russian oil companies, which supply Europe with a third of its natural gas just 3 months before winter, as well as the dramatically worsening Californian and Brazilian droughts, the potential black swan referendums for Scottish and Catalonian independence, and the odds of catastrophic financial dislocation grow that much steeper. And did I mention the September 29th opening of the Shanghai Gold Exchange's International Board and the November 30th Swiss referendum on not only repatriating its foreign-held gold, but reestablishing a new gold standard? In the big picture, we have never seen such a dramatic mismatch between precious metal prices and supply-demand fundamentals, which will only improve dramatically in the coming years. Physical demand is at or near all-time highs everywhere but in the brainwashed North American market. And Peru's announcement this week that gold production will fall by 20% in 2015 and further in 2016 symbolizes the dramatic supply issues the industry faces, care of accelerated depletion, surging mine costs, and cartel-generated capital starvation. Things are becoming so tight in the behind-the-scenes wholesale physical markets, Harvey Organ believes the day the Chinese can no longer source metal is rapidly approaching. When that day arrives, or is beat to the punch by any number of extraneous events, prices may well go no offer overnight. Consequently, we cannot be more vehement in our belief that this may be our last chance at financial survival. And for those taking the initiative to protect yourselves with physical precious metals, we hope you'll call Miles Franklin at 800-822-8080 and give us a chance to earn your business. Don't forget, we publish, in my view, the industry's best daily economic and precious metals newsletter, and do it for free. Between myself, David Scheckman, and Bill Holter, you'll learn more about what's really going on in the world than anywhere else I can comprehend. Not to mention the 3 to 5 podcasts we tape each week, which are also available for free in real time at milesfranklin.com. As for Miles Franklin itself, our 25 years of experience should comfort you that not only will our prices be competitive, but our service the industry's best. Moreover, we operate what I believe to be the industry's best international storage program with Brink Security in Montreal, Canada. And as always, you can contact me with any questions you might have at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com. Thanks and have a nice weekend.